Imagine a world where the biggest players aren't just fighting with guns and bombs, but with minds and strategies. A world where a single misstep in the geopolitical game can change everything: economies, alliances, even the very map of the world itself. This isn't some dystopian future, this is the reality we're living in today. And the players? The United States, Russia, and China. These are the giants whose moves are felt across continents. But here's the twist: while the US and its allies have dominated the seas, China and Russia are slowly tightening their grip on the land. And this isn't just about territory, it's about control, influence, and the future of global power. We're witnessing the early stages of what some are calling the Second Cold War. Now, you might be thinking, isn't this just like the last one? The answer is, it's different. It's not about direct combat on the battlefield. It's a silent war, an ideological, economic, and military struggle that's playing out in ways we're just starting to understand. This isn't the 1,980 seconds with two superpowers staring each other down across the Berlin Wall. This is a new kind of war, one where geography is still important, but so are alliances, cyber capabilities, and trade routes. Let me take you back for a moment. Think about the United States, the original maritime empire. When the US started growing in the 19th century, it wasn't because of land alone. It was about the seas, the trade routes, and the power of naval dominance. While Russia and China built their influence through land, the US understood something crucial. The world's wealth was on the water. They didn't just look at maps of their own continent, they looked at the world at the oceans and saw a road to power. Fast forward to today, and it's still the same. The US is trying to maintain that order, keeping the seas open, maintaining trade routes, all while preventing any one power from controlling them. But here's the catch: China and Russia are not interested in playing by these rules anymore. Russia, sitting on the vast landmass of Eurasia, sees its future through territorial control. And China, with its Belt and Road Initiative, it's less concerned about the seas and more focused on extending its reach across land through roads, pipelines, and influence peddling. And in their pursuit of control, they're making moves that threaten not only the US, but the very structure of the global order as we know it. But it's not all about the players. It's about the rules. The US has long adhered to a rules-based international order, freedom of navigation, free trade, and, most importantly, cooperation. But now, both China and Russia are rejecting these rules. They're not just challenging the US military might, they're challenging the very idea of an open and free global system. What does that mean for the world? What does that mean for the Second Cold War? In this new era, it's not just about who has the biggest army or the most advanced technology. It's about control over ideas, over narratives, and over how the world interacts. The competition isn't just military, it's economic, it's political, and yes, it's digital. So, what does this mean for the future? How did we get here? And what can we learn from the first Cold War to navigate the one we're in now? Stay with me. The story we're about to unfold doesn't just impact the United States, Russia, and China. It impacts everyone, from you sitting at home to the distant corners of the world. To understand where we're headed, we need to take a step back. Let's look at the history, specifically, the history of how nations build their power and influence. We're talking about the contrast between maritime empires and continental empires. The United States, for example, has always been a maritime power. From the very beginning, its strength came not from the vastness of its land, but from its control of the seas. Think of the Navy, think of global trade routes, think of the power to protect those routes with sheer military might. The U.S. Navy, one of the most formidable forces on the planet, wasn't just built to protect its coastlines. It was built to maintain a global system-free and open seas for trade, for communication, for influence. The key here is freedom of navigation, the idea that the seas should remain open for all. Now, look at Russia and China. These two, they don't have the same geographical advantages. They aren't surrounded by oceans. They don't have the same kind of global trade networks to leverage. Instead, they focused on the land. They're what you'd call continental powers. Their empires built on landmass, on borders, on defending territory. And here's where things start to get interesting. Continental powers think differently. They're land focused, and because of that, they view their neighbors very differently. For Russia, that means constantly watching over its borders. From the Mongol invasions to the Nazi threat, Russia has been surrounded by adversaries for centuries. Their primary focus has always been land security, which is why their military strategy has always revolved around defending the vast stretches of land that make up the Russian Federation. The same goes for China. Its historic view of the world has been shaped by the need to secure territory, from the Yellow River to the fringes of the Gobi Desert. But while Russia and China might have landmass, they face a huge problem. They're surrounded by people who don't like them, and that's where the tension begins. When you rely on land as your main source of power, every neighbor becomes a potential threat. Russia, for example, has more borders than any other country in the world. The sheer number of neighbors is staggering, and not all of them are friendly. The same goes for China. Sure, it's big, but its neighbors, India, Japan, Taiwan, and many others, are all locked into a delicate geopolitical balance. The real kicker here is that the US doesn't have to worry about this. As a maritime power, the US has oceans on all sides, essentially a natural defense that has kept potential enemies at bay. That's why the US has always had the luxury of projecting its power globally rather than just focusing on one region. So what happens when these continental powers, Russia and China, start pushing against the very system that the US has built? They're not just challenging the US, they're challenging the entire rules-based order that's kept the peace for decades. And in doing so, they're setting the stage for something much bigger, a second Cold War, with consequences that will ripple through every corner of the globe. The question is, how do we respond? What can we learn from the Cold War of the past to deal with the rising powers of today? Now that we've seen the rise of continental powers like Russia and China challenging the maritime order, let's rewind and examine how the first Cold War ended. What worked back then, and can we apply those same strategies to the new geopolitical struggle unfolding today? In the original Cold War, the stakes were high nuclear annihilation hung over every move. And both superpowers, the US and the Soviet Union, had vast military arsenals. But it wasn't just about bombs and missiles. The war was won through a combination of economic pressure, strategic alliances, and a battle of ideas. One key strategy that the US used effectively was what I like to call the war of attrition. Instead of engaging in direct combat with the Soviet Union, the US relied on proxy wars supporting smaller conflicts around the globe where both superpowers could fight for influence, but without escalating to full-blown nuclear war. Think Vietnam, Korea, and Afghanistan. The US didn't necessarily win every battle, but it didn't have to. It just needed to weaken the Soviet economy over time, stretching its resources thin. At the same time, the arms race played a crucial role. While the Soviets poured vast amounts of their resources into military buildup, some estimates say they dedicated up to 70% of their economy to defense. The US didn't match them pound for pound. Instead, they developed innovative military technologies like the nuclear-powered submarine. These technologies were game changers. The Soviets couldn't match the technological advancements or the financial power of the US, and eventually, their economy began to suffer from overextension. But the US didn't stop at military strategy. There was also a heavy emphasis on ideological warfare. The US used media, propaganda, and diplomacy to promote the values of liberal democracy, free markets, and human rights. Radio Free Europe, Voice of America, these broadcasts were beacons of hope for oppressed people in Eastern Europe, spreading the message that there was an alternative to the Soviet system. And that was powerful. Fast forward to today, and the strategy needs a little tweaking. With Russia and China, the ideological divide is still there, but we can't rely on the same tactics. The world has changed, technology has shifted the balance, and we now live in a highly connected, information-driven world. China, in particular, is leveraging economic power through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative to build alliances and project influence. Meanwhile, Russia's tactics are more covert, using disinformation, cyber attacks, and military interventions to destabilize regions and erode trust in the West. So, how can we learn from the first Cold War to tackle today's challenges? First, it's clear we need to play the long game. Just like the Soviet Union eventually crumbled under the weight of its military spending, Russia and China will face their own internal pressures if we apply the right economic and diplomatic leverage. But instead of focusing solely on military power, we need to double down on economic diplomacy and global alliances. We must also be strategic in where we focus our efforts. Just as the US helped destabilize the Soviet Empire by supporting insurgencies and revolutions, we should be empowering democratic movements in places like Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Eastern Europe. The goal isn't to provoke a direct conflict, but to create fissures within authoritarian regimes, weakening them from within. And, importantly, information warfare is just as crucial today as it was in the Cold War. We must ensure that the narrative of freedom, democracy, and the rules-based international order remains strong and visible. If we don't, China and Russia will continue to shape the world with their Vision 1 of control, censorship, and aggression. But even with all these strategies, it's clear that we're in for a long, drawn-out conflict. The Second Cold War will take time to resolve, but with the right strategy, we can ensure that the world of tomorrow is one that values freedom and stability, not one ruled by authoritarian powers. The real question now is, what role will the US play in this unfolding drama? As we look toward the future, one thing is clear. This Second Cold War is not just about military might or economic power. It's a battle for the global order, for who gets to define the rules by which the world operates. And that, more than anything, will decide the course of this new conflict. So what's next? What should the US and its allies do to ensure they come out on top? First and foremost, alliances will be key. The old Cold War saw the US rallying NATO and other democratic nations around the banner of freedom and security. Today, the world is more interconnected than ever, and alliances can no longer be built solely on military strength. Instead, the US needs to foster deeper, more diversified alliances, not just with traditional European and Asian partners, but with emerging democracies in Africa, Latin America, and even parts of the Middle East. China's Belt and Road Initiative is a clear attempt to build a new kind of global alliance based on economic dependency. The US must counter this by offering a more attractive alternative: partnerships built on mutual respect, shared prosperity, and democratic values. One of the most effective tools the US can use in this regard is economic diplomacy. While military power is essential, it's no longer the only power in the world. The US has long been a leader in global trade and technology, and this is where the future lies. By leveraging trade agreements, technology partnerships, and investment in infrastructure projects in developing regions, the US can offer a better model than the authoritarian state-controlled system China and Russia are pushing. Just as the US used its economic influence to win the Cold War, it can use the same tactics today to create a global web of interdependence that favors freedom over oppression. Another crucial area is cybersecurity. The digital world is now the new battlefield. Russia and China have already demonstrated their willingness to use cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, and espionage to undermine their adversaries. The US and its allies must build robust defenses against these threats while also becoming more proactive in exposing the digital warfare tactics used by authoritarian regimes. This isn't just about protecting our systems, it's about taking the fight to the enemy in the cyber realm and ensuring that free societies can function without interference. At the same time, we can't ignore the internal dynamics of countries like Russia and China. Both nations are facing significant domestic challenges, from economic stagnation to political unrest. Russia's military adventurism in Ukraine has already drained its resources, and China's growing internal contradictions, ranging from economic slowdown to demographic crises, will eventually catch up with them. The US and its allies need to apply diplomatic and economic pressure to exploit these vulnerabilities, making it clear that authoritarianism leads to stagnation and decline, not prosperity. But perhaps most importantly, we need to stay true to the values that have made the West strong: freedom, democracy, and human rights. It's easy to get caught up in the tactical maneuvers of geopolitics, but we must never forget why this fight matters. We're not just fighting for strategic advantage or economic gain, we're fighting for a world where people can speak their minds, choose their leaders, and live without fear of oppression. So, what's the way forward? It's a long and complicated road, but the strategies of the past — military strength, strategic alliances, economic diplomacy, and ideological commitment — can still guide us. The Second Cold War won't be won overnight, but with patience, intelligence, and the right strategies, the US and its allies can not only survive, but thrive in the New World Order. As we navigate this new era, it's crucial to remember that we're not just fighting to preserve our own way of life, we're fighting for the future of freedom itself. The world is watching, and the decisions we make today will shape the global landscape for generations to come. The battle isn't over yet, but with the right approach, it's one we can win.